Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are. And welcome back to Achampnator Reads, today with chapter 13 of The Last Elf. I knew this place a long time ago, when I was still a child, the dragon began. A puppy, corrected the hunter. One born lately, said the little elf. It was at the time when I still had a name. Now it has slipped from my memory, since for centuries upon centuries no one has uttered it. I came here, because here lies the most precious treasure in the whole world. The dragon went on. Really? The hunter asked. A treasure? Where is it? All around us. The hunter looked around. He could see nothing but stalactites and cobwebs. Where the spiders of the second runic dynasty thought to be valuable? He asked disappointedly. Admire, said the dragon. He filled his cheeks and blew gently. Century of dust and cobwebs flew away, revealing millions of books. This was the great library of the second runic dynasty. It was a time of knowledge, and people treated this place as though it were a temple, in silence and no spitting with clean hands, and the dust wiped from their shoes, and to be quite certain that nobody misbehaved. Dragons have always been here, and that's why there are signs that say, "Here be dragons." This was the biggest collection of knowledge that had ever existed. Then men lost writing. They forgot how to read. Barbarism flooded the world. The very memory of this place faded away. Many people never believed in its existence. But with my wings, I finally found it. And when I reached this place, great was my joy. All the books in the world were for me. Tears still come to my eyes when I remember. When old age arrived and snatched my strength from me so that my fire no longer lit, and my wings no longer spread. When I could not even remember my name, then here I settled. I was too tired, too aged on fly. All that I had to keep me from succumbing to hunger was a handful of golden beans. I had gathered them far hence, in places where the sun shines brightly, enough rain falls to stave off death. I had to grow more beans, which need more heat and more water than could be found at the top of this mountain. But this mountain is a volcano. I moved the rock, and good warmth and good steam came to warm my bones and my beans, so that my bones would cease to hurt and the beans would grow full well. And soon I grew afraid that all the steam which rose into the sky would darken the sky and make the earth cold. But too hard it was to cover the crater and leave it closed, to die of cold and hunger, frozen in with nothing to chew upon. But it's your fault that there's hunger and misery. But it's your fault that there is hunger and misery, cried the little elf, as the hunter tried to lift him out of the trajectory of the dragon's nostrils. The dragon recommenced its lamentations, quietly and faintly. The stalactites stayed where they were. Does everyone we meet spend all their time crying? Asked the hunter. Not everyone, the woman replied. Only the ones who don't spend all the time trying to hang us. Can you put that big rock back? The little elf asked, firmly but politely. To die of cold, enfeeblement, and famine? No, the little elf said bravely. He became more resolute. I won't let you die. I swear, I will always be with you, and I will feed you. I will heat this place by burning bundles of twigs, and I will collect the twigs from the wood. If no more beans grow, I will plant corn cobs. I will ease your hunger. I swear on my elf's honor. There was a long silence. Josh Kron's Squawkle Jonas' drink was calm and serious. He almost gave the impression of being slightly taller. The dragon spoke first. Old I am, and quite weak. I can no longer fly. Now I can no longer burn. If you deceive me, there is nothing left for me but to die of cold with my belly empty. The dragon stretched out with his big muzzle on the ground. He closed his eyes. There was a long silence. Yosh Grunk Squawkle Jonas Drink approached the dragon and put a hand on his forehead. Big, rough scales passed beneath his fingertips. Infinite tiredness. The little elf felt it in his head, through his fingers. Total and absolute exhaustion. I'll protect you, said the little elf. But for the time being, put the stone back in the right place. The dragon nodded. He pressed his muzzle to the center of the rock and pushed with all his might. It was slow work, one step at a time. But by evening, the crater was blocked. The hunter and the little elf pushed as well. The woman roasted the beans along with the corn cobs. A smell of warmth and good things wafted all around them. The dog had settled on a carpet of bean leaves, as soft as velvet, and was dozing peacefully. Yorsh started talking again. For the first time in his life, he felt strong. He knew what to do, why to do it, how to do it. I will stay with you and find you things to eat, he promised. Do you like corn cobs? Yes? Good, I have some in my pocket. While we eat the remaining beans, we will plant the kernels from the corn cobs and make a field of them. Just outside. They grow even without heat and without steam. And then we'll read. You'll see it. It'll be lovely. I think this is the circle we must break. The water becomes steam, which becomes a cloud, which becomes rain, which becomes water. Now the circle is broken. I will stay with you, and I won't let you die of hunger. The dragon looked enchanted. He nodded his head happily. He asked to see the corn cobs once more, and to hear the story of their cultivation. Then he wept a little, but his time with joy, and finally he came out with the strangest speech he had delivered all day. He said that the other elf, the tall one, the one that had passed this way some time ago, had told the dragon to keep the crater closed, because he feared that was the cause of the darkness. And the rains. And he, too, had offered to help ease the dragon's hunger. But after a day, the elf had changed his mind, telling the dragon that he could leave the crater open if he felt like it, because it would be good for the beans, and that with the plume of steam rising up, the road would be easier for his son to find, who would have to pass this way too, sooner or later, to fulfill his destiny. The little elf couldn't breathe. His father had been here. His father had been here, had had the chance to stop the darkness, to give the right level of rain, the right level of sunshine back to the world, to stop the world's famine and misery, and he hadn't done it. It was appalling, horrendous, atrocious, unimaginable, unspeakable. Terrifying, said the woman. Chilling, agreed the man. The little elf was experiencing one of the most wretched emotions of creation, being ashamed of one's own forebears. His face crumpled. The light in his eyes went out. His mind was filled with pain, and his magic was drowned in it. He wouldn't be able to bring even a midge back to life. Why? Asked the woman. How do you sell a pot of good weather for 3 gold pieces in a world where the sun shines? His father had profited from the rain. The elves have always had an eye for a deal, haven't they? Replied the hunter. An icy age filled his voice. He paced up and down the cave, taking great strides. He gave the fire a kick, sending corncobs and beans flying in all directions. The dog stopped wagging his tail and whimpered with fear. Years of misery, years of famine, of darkness, of despair, all because of a stupid dragon and elf. Who? Who? The hunter searched his brain for an insult that was sufficiently harsh. Finally, he found the worst one of all. All because of an elf who behaved like an elf. Josh Squackle Jonastring gave a faint sigh, but this time only the dog came to comfort him. Is there any way out of here? The man asked the dragon in a tone both abrupt and tired. I mean, without getting killed in the waterfall for people without wings, he added. There was. At the end of the clearing, there was an old road that snaked through the dark mountains toward the southern side, away from the river and the waterfall, to lose itself in the dense forest to the north of the dark mountains. The woman and the hunter prepared to go. The dog would come with them, but the little elf would be left behind. By the time they went outside, night had already fallen, but it was so clear and bright, full of the most brilliant stars, and with a luminous moon, that they decided to leave anyway. The road began exactly opposite the spot from which they had arrived. It was not at first easy to see, hidden as it was among the cedars, and in places invaded by clumps of daisies, but was still recognizable, because it had once been paved, and some of the old paving remained. The slabs were small and hexagonal, and fitted into each other like the cells of bees in a hive. Hidden among the daisies were little columns that must in the past have supported railings to help walkers up and down. From time to time, the road opened up into little terraces, giving them a place to rest. As they made their way down, cedars made way for larches, and then enormous chestnuts, and a few oaks. The night was so clear that even at that late hour Sire stopped to pick chestnuts. She put them in her knapsack, one after another, trying not to hurt her hands on the spines. She collected them by the dozens, filling her hands with spines, despite her precautions, and then burst into tears. Well, it's better than being hanged, muttered the hunter. Saria didn't weep for long. She got back to her feet. She turned around and set off for the slope. I'm going to the little one, she said resolutely. Gently, calmly, but resolutely. The tone of someone who isn't coming back. It wasn't his fault, she went on. He hasn't done anything. It wasn't, in fact, he's sacrificing his life for the dragon, so that the sun can shine again. He's saving the world, and we haven't even thanked him. Perhaps his father was a swine, but so what? It doesn't mean the little elf isn't decent. And anyway, his father wasn't responsible for the Age of Mud. He just didn't stop it from happening. It's not the same thing. He didn't want to sacrifice his life to be with the dragon and save the weather. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe he was sick. Maybe there were other things he had to do. Get back to his son. Perhaps try to warn him about something. What do we know? And how dare we judge him? People blame elves for everything, and it doesn't seem right for us to join in the chorus. He didn't cause the darkness. He just didn't save us. The hunter followed her silence. At intervals, he emitted a grunt of disapproval. But not only did he not slow down his pace, He actually quickened it as best he could, despite his exhaustion. By the time the moon sank, they were back among the cedar trees. The clouds were covering the stars, and the darkness was complete. Climbing was impossible. The two squatted down together, along with the dog, on one of the terraces. The rest of the night passed like that. At the first light of dawn, they rose to their feet and climbed as fast as they could, with the urgency of those who have caused an injustice, who have failed to control their rage and have to put it right, because they have hurt a little one, a puppy, one born lately. When they finally reached the library, the sun was shining brightly, and the waterfall in the distance gleamed with all the colors of the rainbow. The door to the grotto was open, and the dragon was sleeping in the golden light of his cave. The library had been carefully cleaned. All the parchments were gleaming, neat and tidy. The little elf was sitting in one of the inner rooms. He was surrounded by parchment, covered with silvery elfish characters, with strange drawings of balls and circles. He was as happy as an eagle who had just learned to fly, and was sitting in the middle of a series of balls that spun in unequal circles, oblique and elongated, around a central ball, which in turn rotated on its own axis. "My father wrote them," said the little elf, showing the writings and drawings. "But I made this," he added euphorically, pointing to the balls rotating in midair. "I used an old dragon skin. You know, they change them like snakes to make the globes, and now I'm making them imitate the planets. As long as they're small things and as long as they rotate, I can make them stay in the air, even in defiance of gravity." A long and complicated explanation followed. There were parchments and parchments about the movements of the stars in the room off to the side. But the dragon had never reached them. Given the dimensions of the openings between one room and another, everything that was not in the central room was as inaccessible to the dragon as the fresh air outside. The dragon had never been able to study the astral movements, but the little elf's father, he who finds the road and shows it to the others, Gornon Ben Meyergold, had been able to show them to the dragon, and the dragon had understood. Yor's father had left such clear explanations that Yorsh had been able to grasp everything in the course of a single night. The conclusion was that the variation in the climate had happened because it had happened, and nobody was to blame. Now it was going away again, because the moment had come for everything to return to normal. And nobody could claim the credit for it. The volcano had nothing to do with it. Its plume of white steam wasn't powerful enough to turn the region into a muddy bog. The little elf used a large number of meaningless words. Meteorites, variation in the terrestrial axis. Once again, he mentioned the law of gravity, even though nothing here was falling to the ground. And no one was going to be hanged. The gust of the whole business was that the years of rain and mud had come by chance because of an enormous rock that had passed in the sky, where no one could see it. And now the rain and mud were going because the rock was moving again, away. This brought something called the angle of the Earth's axis back to a position where the climate was optimal, or at least not too wild. In short, the usual: a bit of sun, a bit of rain every now and again. A lovely day with a light breeze for flying kites or sowing grain. The hunter and the woman didn't understand very much, but they didn't interrupt to ask what a planet was, and whether globe meant the same thing as ball. They listened politely to the elf's explanation, and agreed with him that since they had begun traveling together, the weather had, for the first time in years, started to improve. The blue of the sky, the sun, the stars had all reappeared. Pieces of sunset, fragments of dawn had shown up, after years in the middle of the clouds and the downpours. The clearest thing about the astronomic explanation, it seemed to them, was the linguistic aspect. Language of the second runic dynasty was extremely precise. The prophecy said, when the last dragon and the last elf break the circle, the past and the future will meet, and the sun of a new summer will shine in the sky. When not Kuchen, when not Kuchen. In the second runic dynasty, when means at the same time, simultaneously, whereas Kuchen means in consequence of, an event happening as a direct result of another event taking place. But this prophecy read when, indicating it would simply happen during the same period of time, not as a consequence of. And the circle that the little elf and the dragon were to break was not the cycle of water, steam, cloud, rain, and water, but the other circle, the horizon that closes around you, and you're the only one inside it. The circle of loneliness. The little elf had to meet the last dragon to join the past and the future, to recover the knowledge of the glorious past of humankind, when science and knowledge had filled people's lives, and recover them for the future. It was so clear and so lovely, and his father had understood everything and left a trail for his son to follow, like a trail of stones gleaming in the moonlight. And what about the pot of good weather? It's an ordinary smoking pot. The improvement in the rain would start in the lands closest to the dark mountains, which are protected from the winds that come from the west. My father foresaw it. In human language, selling a smoking pot for 3 gold pieces is called a swindle, or a swindle, the man said, narrowly escaping a kick in the shins. In elfish language, it's called genius, the little elf replied cheerfully. Not just because my father left me the way of getting here, but also because by selling it dearly, he brought them harmony. The inhabitants of the village, convinced of superior magic that would bring them peace as well as good weather, stopped fighting among themselves, and that's worth much more than a bit of gold. The key rule in business is that when you pay a lot of money for something that isn't valuable, you've still done a deal. I think the head of the village understood that too. There was a long silence. Then the man started laughing. It was a long, liberating laugh. The woman burst into tears and hugged the little elf for a long time, holding him tightly so that he would remember him always. She would remember him always. Maybe we'll meet again, the little elf said, hoping with all his heart. Maybe they would meet again, but now they had to part. They had to live their lives, which consisted of fields, meadows, and geese to tend, maybe children to raise, certainly not books and golden beans. He had sworn to stay with the dragon. Sadness filled him, and the spheres that were spinning in midair rolled softly to the ground. Sooner or later it will happen, said the woman. They stayed there, hugging for a long time, while the sun rose higher and higher. The library was flooded with gilded light. The beans shone like jewels in the middle of the ancient shelves. I'd like to give the dog a name, said the Yorshkrungsquackle Jonas Drink. Saria hugged him even tighter. Of course. Yorshkrungsquackle Jonas' drink was filled with emotion, his chest swelled with pride. Fido, he said triumphantly. Fido? Asked the hunter. Fido? Dogs are called Tail or Patch or Paw or simply Dog. Fido's a silly name for a dog. It's peculiar. He'll be the first and last dog caught. He wasn't able to finish his sentence. The usual kick in the shins pulled him up short. It's a lovely name, said Sire. It'll be fine. They hugged for a bit longer, then a bit longer, and another bit longer. Meanwhile, the dragon had woken. He yawned half a dozen times, after which he was informed that he could reopen his volcano and keep his aching old bones warm amidst the golden beans for all the time to come. The old dragon was so delighted, he wagged his tail, knocking down the 3 stalagmites and a piece of shelf. The joy also stirred up the dragon's memory, like a ladle in soup. And something surfaced, not his name, which was now lost forever, but something else. He remembered that beneath that big portal was a casket containing something that looked like a beans, but which broke your teeth if you tried to eat it. What was it called again? That thing that's used to make scepters and crowns. Did they know what to do with it? The dragon wondered. They did? Oh, good. Well then, perhaps they could do the dragon the favor of taking it. It was a nuisance where it was. The hunter and the woman looked at their little elf one last time and waved goodbye forever. As they were going down the very long road, followed by the dog, the hunter often helped the woman over the more difficult points, giving her his hand. Then he went on holding her hand, even when there was nothing to slip on, nothing to clamber on over. She didn't withdraw it. The dog followed them contently. If you like, with the pieces of gold the dragon had given us, we can buy ourselves a bit of land and live happily, said the man. The woman didn't reply. With the wine, a little grain, a few corn cobs. With the wine, a little grain, a few corn cobs, he added. The woman stopped. Some chickens, she suggested. The man smiled and squeezed her hand. They went on in silence. They had almost reached the bottom of the road when the man spoke again. You know, this morning, when the first light came and shone on you, well, that is, we could, I thought, you know how lovely it is when the sky turns pink at dawn. I mean, if we had a daughter, we could call her Rosalba, the pink light of dawn. The woman didn't withdraw her hand. It's a pretty name, she agreed with a slightly shy smile. Then she thought about it. If we have a daughter, we can call her Rosalba, she corrected. She dodged a kick that nearly caught her on the shin. She started laughing. Then they hugged and stayed for a long time in each other's arms, each feeling the warmth of the other's body. They hugged for a long time beneath the bright sky that lit them up, not least because they had wanted to do just that from the first moment they had set eyes on each other. That was chapter 13 of The Last Elf. Next time we do chapter 14. But for now I say, have a good morning, good day, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. See ya.